Welcome to the very first edition of Beyond the Paradox, where social innovation meets pop culture. I'm Juanique Randall. This is the introductory episode where I explain why it's important to question the stories we're exposed to in the media and entertainment industry. Each episode, I select a thought leader who's pushing the boundaries of social and environmental innovation to review some movies, TV series, and other forms of major entertainment, and discuss whether these narratives help or hinder their efforts to make the world a better place. And like Einstein said, to make sure we aren't solving the problem with thinking that created it, we look at ways to speak about our world's problems, well, differently, by setting aside our ideologies, judgments, and preconceived ideas to explore the world beyond the polarizing global paradox of right and wrong. So, metaphorically speaking, to me it's obvious what superheroes and social innovators have in common. But what would a superhero's nemesis and Sigmund Freud or Friedrich Hegel have in common? Before I give you the answer, let me ask you this. Have you ever stopped to ask what story we're telling ourselves as humanity about our potential, individual and collective? Does the media focus mostly on what we can or can't do? When we scroll through our news feeds about the happenings of the world on a daily basis, do we feel mostly empowered or generally demoralized? Are we aware how much well-meaning investment is still being driven toward well-meaning solutions born from the same thinking that created the problem they're supposedly trying to solve? And how do we tell the difference? Is there a way to change this? What would happen if we did? Well, the futurist's role is to sketch scenarios about what the world would be like if we took a certain direction, and why it's important to think about the world in that way. My journey started when I studied journalism. I watched enough superhero movies to know that reporters are on a particular quest to find the truth. Consider this your upfront geek warning. There is lots of geeking in my podcast. Now, you may not hear arguments about who would win a battle between Superman and Batman. I will discuss how the epic war between the forces of ignorance and humanity could cloud its potential for being our best selves. Rewriting the narrative and rewiring thinking take time and commitment. First, it's important to be able to recognize how many of the world's stories leading to this point represent the minority and exclude the majority. Ironic, isn't it? It's also important to realize that humanity will never become more than the sum of its parts if we're constantly hearing from only one part. How would we know what the picture in the puzzle is trying to tell us if we're only shown a corner? For example, all superhero reporters shared the same cultural background. In other words, as of the time of this recording, which is 2019, it's really hard to find alter ego reporters who represent the cultural diversity on this or any of the 52 Earths in the Flash multiverse that we're currently aware of. There's Clark Kent, Peter Parker, Vicky Vale, Lois Lane. It's 2020 and our pop culture bubble is so small, Joseph Robbie Robertson is buried as a supporting role to the bugle photographer Peter Parker, while Ben Urich and Iris West Allen's casting can either be considered better late than never or simply too little, too late. In 2008, I founded Social Intel, a strategic communications consultancy, and worked with NGOs, governments, business, developing strategies for fast-tracking change in areas of social and environmental justice. After mapping all the role players locally and a good few internationally via major global donor networks, I saw a different world from the one we see in the media. I saw a world that could not fail. A world full of people with solutions trying to succeed in making an impact while stuck inside an outdated, broken system. I figured there has to be some way to tell their stories, so everyone else's awareness of this potential could help bring momentum to their work. But how? Well, if there's one constant in a world of change, it's science. After all, without science and physics, there would be no superheroes, no vats of green liquid to fall into or to be electrocuted into oblivion by. Not that one can be electrocuted into oblivion by vats of green liquid, but you know what I mean. Anyway, science works using something called complexity. Basically, an advanced, intelligent computer code that runs nature. To understand its laws and how they apply to humanity, during my consultancy, I took it upon myself to do a year's course at a local university's Institute for Futures Research, known as the Biomatrix Systems Theory for Organizational and Social Change. While birthing my inner futurist during that year, I wrote a book called Beyond the Paradox. Now the name of this podcast. And that brings us back to what superhero nemesis and Freud have in common. I learned about a little thing called the Hegelian dialectic, what screenwriters would call one of the narrative arcs of this podcast. In the world of superheroes, the world is divided into right and wrong, light and dark, right and left, conservative and liberal, all ironically, according to physics, opposing roles of essentially the same spectrum. In fact, by resisting the one, you're reinforcing the other. Welcome to humanity, a dog chasing its tail, round and round and round where few benefit while the majority are crippled by constant disaster management. And that, listeners, brings me to the second story arc. Finding ways alongside extraordinary people to move beyond this paradox. We explore how mass media, PR, and communication strategies drive this principle and are driven by it. Identifying where powerful people have found ways over time to use it to oppress others. Ownership of media helps to control the markets, and there's a long history of brands, governments, and organizations working with Hollywood writers and directors to inform storylines, like race and justice reporter at Mother Jones really pointed out in a recent article. The Pentagon has had an entertainment liaison office since 1946. Simply put, we need to take control of the narrative, or it will continue to be written on our behalf. By the way, here's another clue as to what Freud and Sauron have in common. So what could narrative media and communications look like in the future if not driven by an industrial agenda? To find out, join me on a journey beyond the paradox, free from programming of industrial thinking, to new ways of dialoguing and narrative creation, to the unknown world where we agree to disagree and find out what's beyond that. And who best to regulate the entertainment industry, the pop culture narratives that shape our psyche, than those pushing environmental and social boundaries to make the world a better place? What happens when we shift the dominant narrative by insisting it include the value of diverse global perspectives instead of one dominated by the agendas of the few? Let's free our individual and collective human narratives and collectively choose our destiny. Could this be what the word post-human means? The world beyond the paradox, where we're still human but something more, perhaps superhuman? Before we take this journey together, I want to leave you with a quote to set the tone and act as a reminder of where we are. So when we move forward, it's thoughtful and considerate. Before jumping to "we're all in this together," it's important to remember that we're not human in the same way to begin with. We must be mindful of the fact that the human is by no means a neutral term. It's a term that indexes access to privileges and entitlements. To be post-human does not mean that you are post-power, post-class, post-gender, post-violence. Quite the contrary. Rosie Braidotti. Oh, and if you're still curious about what Hegel and Darth Vader have in common, and you want your suspicion confirmed, you'll just have to tune into the next episode of Beyond the Paradox. Thank you for listening. This is Juanique Randall.